Welcome to Trekosophy, the podcast about the philosophy of Star Trek. Joining us tonight, our first officer, who's a lot more stoic since he got the beard, Chris McGee.
Good evening.
Our technical advisor, who can fix any problem without having to modify the phase variance or reverse the polarity, Brendan Kirby.
Good day.
And joining us from his recent vacation at the Holodiction Clinic is Tim Davidson.
Hello.
And
Excellent
once again,
intro.
I'm Bill Allen, a.k.a. the Red Shirt. And before we get into tonight's episode, let's take a moment and say hi to Mr. Davidson, joining us for the first time tonight, and say a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Okay, thanks. Hi, I'm Tim. I'm a long-time fan and interested in Star Trek, and I have a philosophy degree, a BA in philosophy. So basically, I'm the type of person who thinks about the philosophy of Star Trek, I guess. I'm Brandon's friend, and he's the one who introduced me to and told me about what you guys are doing here with Trekosophy, and I was really psyched.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, good to have you.
Thanks.
We're sorry to say Ben is out sick tonight, I'm afraid, but he did ask us to forge ahead and leave him behind, unfortunately. No. So we're going to do that. We're going to actually tackle the topic of Jean-Luc Picard's religious views. There's one announcement I did want to make to our listeners. If you've been listening to our show up until now, you probably noticed that I haven't been very participative in our discussions up until now. And part of the reason for that is that, unlike the geniuses here, Bill, Brandon, Tim, and Ben, I don't really have more than a passing knowledge of philosophy. And so once they go off on the tangents and talking about Aristotelian or whatever things, I start to just kind of step back, let them take control, because it's a little over my head, I'll be honest with you. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of you listeners might be feeling the same way. So we're going to change things up just a little bit, if we can, and instead of just, letting everybody discuss their viewpoints, which is great, I'd also like to kind of interject now and then from the point of view of the average listener who may not have a degree in philosophy and ask the questions, well, what do you mean by this particular term? How do you mean this? And that way we can kind of clarify things as we go along rather than just assuming that everyone out there knows exactly what we're all talking about.
I think that's a brilliant addition to the show.
That's a great idea.
So
Yes,
I apologize
absolutely.
ahead of time if I'm going to be interrupting quite a bit and saying, okay, what does that mean? And because I'd like to know myself, and I'd like for our listeners to also understand as well. And if they are super intelligent and they know all about the philosophical terms, then they can just kind of gloss over your definition and then move on.
Well, Chris, I've always really appreciated your contributions, but that's a really good point. Philosophers have a tendency to talk in a specific vocabulary that it's esoteric isn't the right word, but it's
Academic.
well, yeah, it's not always the most accessible conversation. So to bring it down to earth is, that's sorely needed.
And part of this is
I
because I haven't yet seen any comments to any of our posts on the website, which granted, we're just getting off the ground here. It's not like we're going to gain an audience overnight. And we haven't seen any comments on our iTunes page either. And I'm wondering if maybe we're just a little bit too high in the, as you say, the vocabulary department, that we're leaving some people behind. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'll be honest. My background in philosophy is not as deep as everyone else's, but I've got a better background in politics, so I'm very good at faking knowing something I don't know anything about, which is what I've been doing. So definitions of terms and whatnot would be a good thing.
Definitely.
All right. With that out of the way, who would like to kick us off tonight?
Well, I thought I heard Bill say something to the effect of, "You think Picard is a Catholic?"
I was interested to hear Bill's reasoning there.
Yeah, that was in the
All right,
pre-show.
well,
Go ahead, Bill.
yeah, we can start with that, I guess. Well, in the future they give us for Star Trek, there are no more independent nations. There's no more division of any kind. All humanity is a nice, homogenous whatever. They don't really mention people who have different beliefs, but we are told that all beliefs are respected and tolerated. So it doesn't mean the beliefs are gone, they're still there. And same thing with national identities. There aren't nations anymore. It's one world government. But Picard is pretty much he's French. In the first few seasons, they have a few points where he waxes poetically about being French and about what France is like. When he sings a song, he's singing in French. His family is a traditionalist family. They've got that whole vineyard that they've had for hundreds of years in France, growing wine the old-fashioned way. Being an old-fashioned, traditional French family, more than likely, Picard was raised Catholic because that's pretty much the big religion in France.
Yeah, are you speaking like statistically or what?
Yeah, well, statistically and a little bit stereotypically too. I mean, when I think of France and religion, I think of Charlton Heston as Cardinal Richelieu.
To be honest, I disagree with you there. I continue.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying it's stereotypically it's throughout a lot of France's history when they're involved in all of Europe's Catholic versus Protestant wars. France is almost always fighting on the Catholic side of things, and it's just with the way Picard. I mean, Picard rebelled against his family, so I don't think he was a practicing Catholic, but I think that was probably the religion he grew up in, and I think it was Tim before the show who said he was a cultural Catholic, I think is the term.
Well, that was me.
Oh, that was you. Okay.
But I think that terminology is an important one because I've got a lot more experience with Quebec and the French people in the province Tim and I live in, New Brunswick, and here in Canada. One thing you notice is that a lot of strict Catholics will make a distinction between Catholics and Catholics who attend Mass. In Quebec, I think as little as 20 years ago, something like 89% of their population would attend Catholic Mass. And the number of people who purported to be Catholic was something like 88%. Well, now the number of people in Quebec, Canada's French province, that attend Mass is down to about 15%. But the number of people who still claim to be a Catholic, who will identify themselves as a cultural Catholic, is still hovering around 80%. So it's entirely possible to have Picard as somebody who's completely secular, but would still identify as a Catholic just by virtue of identifying himself as a Frenchman.
I don't even think there's reason to think that, though, that he would identify culturally as a Catholic, or that there's any particular reason to identify France still or in the future as culturally Catholic in that way. I think culturally Picard is an academic. He's an Enlightenment academic. He's always reading Shakespeare. He probably reads Voltaire. He's the type of that type of culture, I think. I don't see him as a Catholic, French Catholic at all. Culturally, I mean, you did mention that his background was sort of rebelling against his family's vineyard there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure. I mean, they never say anything about religion during the Next Generation too much. They try to leave that as neutral as possible. But given the few times we hear about Picard's family and they talk about how old-fashioned and traditionalist they are, Picard, even in his rebelling against the family tradition and going off to join space, it's like you say, he's still an academic and he's an expert in things that are centuries old. So even in his rebelling and setting a new path. He's still several hundred years of history behind that path, I guess, if that makes any sense at all.
It does a bit, because if you read some of the debates in ancient Rome when Christianity was the new religion and it was expanding and almost completely taking over the Roman Empire, some Romans were arguing they ought to adhere to their old gods, the ancient Roman paganism, just by virtue of that being their culture. They wanted to be romantic about it.
But I still don't necessarily agree that Picard culturally identifies as French, or that what would be culturally identified as French in the future would be anything like that. As you said, they don't necessarily have nation states anymore. It's implied that you can travel, beam around Earth very quickly. You could work in France, but sleep in San Francisco. There's no sort of identification there.
Well, Tim, you and I have a fondness for the first season of Next Generation, and I don't find that fondness outside of you and I. But in the episode The Last Outpost, I think it was called The Last Outpost, where...
Okay, I saw that recently, actually. I've been watching them in HD, of course.
Oh, well, of course. Yeah, the Ferengi had immobilized the Enterprise, and I think it was The Last Outpost, but Picard was going on about his French culture, and when he was speaking about the flags, all of a sudden when he started talking about the French flag...
Yeah, Data listed.
Right, well, right. Data... Right, exactly. He all of a sudden, he got wide-eyed. I mean, there was something captivating about France to him.
Yeah, and I think that's... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they never really, he didn't beat you over the head with his Frenchness, but throughout the run of the show, there were enough references to indicate that Picard took his heritage seriously, I suppose. It was, he acknowledged that he wasn't just an Earthman, he was specifically a French Earthman. The episode where the ship gets a cosmic string and he's stranded in the elevator with the children, he has them sing Frere Jacques to stay calm. That's the song he wants to sing. Could have been Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Could have been anything. He went with Frere Jacques.
I was going to say in the first season episode, Hyde and Q, Q also, and from he says, mind of Picard chooses a French Legion as the sort of war game example of human culture.
Bill, you were talking about how Captain Picard is every now and then he kind of drops these little hints in a way.
He does make a lot of French references.
That he's French, as if we, would forget. But regardless, how does that point to the fact that he's Catholic? That's what I want to know.
Well, I mean,
how does
part
that
of it
prove
is
anything?
Okay. Well, the two things that stick out in my mind, I guess, along those lines are, like I say, the old Charlton Heston as Cardinal Richelieu, the Three Musketeers, the French are Catholic. It's
They're
probably
not Catholic as the Spanish or the Italians.
If I were to tell you, though, that I lived in Rome in the 6th century, you would probably assume that I was a Christian, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I'd make that assumption. If it was 6th century Rome or anything after that, yeah, more than likely you'd be not just a Christian. Well, yeah, 6th century you'd still be a Christian. Like you said, you were like 13th century Rome. You're probably
you'd want to get specific about my denomination, but
right.
Yeah, so you're just going with a default assumption here. And what is
it is a default assumption. I mean, I do think that Picard might be. I mean, now we can get into the meat of the topic, Picard's views on other people's religions, the fact that he seems a bit more tolerant of other cultures' religious views kind of points to the fact, in my mind at least, that he has a religion of his own that he kind of, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
I don't agree with that either. But to go back with the cultural identification, as I said, he does make references to being French, but I think culturally, he's definitely an Enlightenment historian thinker. There's a lot more references to Shakespeare, as I said, or to like Enlightenment thinkers, or to just academia and that type of things in his character.
But
yeah,
That's not opposed to Catholicism, though.
No, but I'm talking about cultural identification with Picard. And
What? Why don't we centralize the conversation a little bit about, or centralize it on Picard's
religion.
metaphysical views?
Well, I think
I mean, because you could be culturally Catholic and an atheist. I have a lot of friends who identify as Catholics, but when I ask them about God, they hum and haw, and if you drag it out of them, they'll say, well, look, I don't believe X, Y, and Z. So I mean, he does reference God from time to time in the show.
I think Picard is clearly an atheist, but a Roddenberry-esque atheist. And by that I mean he views humans as having a very strong purpose to explore the galaxies, and that there's always this sense of a frontier of being able to learn more. And he has almost sort of a sort of Pythagorean respect for the order in the universe that we have to discover.
Well, there's obviously two data points. There's who
But
watches.
he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in God, and he does not have a relationship with God.
Well,
Are you just saying that because we never hear him or see him discuss his own viewpoint, his own religion?
He has
You're making an
discussed his
assumption
own
that
viewpoint a little bit. There's one episode, I think it's the first or second season. I forget which episode, but it's the second season. At the end, Data specifically asks him what he thinks happens after we die.
Yeah, I was just
And
looking at that
Picard
myself.
responds that
it's
and
where
he-
Silence Has Lease is the name of the episode.
okay, having a clip from that would be awesome. But basically, he just
Well,
says,
I've got the text here. We could inject a clip maybe later on, but the text basically says, he asks, which do you believe, sir? And Picard responds, considering the marvelous complexity of the universe, its clockwork perfection, its balances of this against that, matter, energy, gravitation, time, dimension, I believe that our existence must be more than either of these philosophies. That what we
and
are
the two
goes
philosophies you're
beyond.
referring to there.
Atheism and belief in the a
He refers
celestial.
to the existence of heaven and the non-existence of heaven.
Well,
Yeah.
non-existence, posthumous non-existence, life after death versus no life after death.
Yes, and that's an atheist worldview. Not believing in God, not being an atheist is being an atheist.
Yeah, that's right. That's
So he's
analytically
an atheist.
no, he's not. Well, finish the quote.
Well, there's not much left. It says that
He says,
that
go
what
ahead.
we are goes beyond Euclidean or other practical measuring systems, and that our existence is part of a reality beyond what we understand now as reality.
Right,
Which is kind of deep.
And that's very what I was calling Roddenberry-esque. And then Roddenberry, in the history of Star Trek Next Generation, his views are a lot stronger in the first season, in particular, and the second season. After
Well,
that, he lost control.
I
for that
disagree.
command.
Because that's the central premise in the teleological argument, the traditional teleological argument.
Okay, now
He
you have
does
to explain what
reference
you
the
mean by
teleological.
teleological.
That, the order
Sure.
of the
Well,
universe
I mean,
that makes
it's-
God the watchmaker.
yeah. I mean, the idea is that the universe has a certain rationality to it, or as Picard says, a clockwork perfection.
Right.
It's the idea that if I were to drop an object, it behaves roughly the same way, even if I were to drop it 1,000 times. The behavior of the universe has a particular mathematical rationality to it. So whatever you want to say about the cause of the universe, you have to say it has the capacity to arrange things rationally.
Mm-hmm. But
It's-
believing that doesn't make you a theist, though.
No, it
as I
just
said, the
says-
Pythagoreans believed in a strong order in the universe, but they weren't theists.
No, it just says that if you want to say something about the cause of the universe, you have to say that it has the capacity to arrange things according to reason. And that's, I mean, that's step
I
one
think
to
what he's
the,
talking about
he's
here
granting the first premise of the teleological argument. Now, what he does with it, I find fascinating, utterly fascinating. He says, okay, you've got certain mythological beliefs. and you've got atheistic beliefs, and you say, okay, the reality of the situation is that none of these approaches on the depth of what's actually going on. You see something that points to something deeper than our universe.
Hmm. Yeah, the way
But
I'm seeing it
go ahead.
is,
Go ahead.
yeah, the way I'm reading what he's saying here is that, yeah, some people believe this, other people believe that. There's so many different views as to what happens to us when we die. But what I believe is that what happens to us is something we can't even understand now because we
Too
are
far to
so
find.
limited in our imagination, even in our knowledge, that whatever we think of is nowhere near
True.
what will really be. That's
I
what I
don't.
kind of get out of it.
I don't find
I
that
think that's
compatible.
exactly what
It
he's
could
saying.
it could be compatible with atheism, but it's absolutely not compatible with materialism,
Yeah,
which is a
that
philosophy that
statement is non-materialist.
in materialism is a philosophy. When I say atheism, most people have in mind something similar to materialism. I mean,
That's true, but not strictly speaking.
Okay,
well,
what do you mean by materialism?
it's the belief that material is all that there is, or matter is all that there is. There's nothing beyond the matter of the universe. But what Picard's saying is, look, the universe appears to have some sort of a direction. There's a directedness because of the clockwork
He's saying that
perfection,
there's
because
order.
of the science. Yeah, I know there's order. There's scientific laws, but because there's scientific laws, it appears that the universe is directed, not undirected. But if atheism is true, I should say, if materialism is true, you'd have to say that the universe is undirected. Things happen according to chance. Well, it doesn't look that way when we look at it. There are laws. There is an if P then Q relationship to the way matter works.
So a
Again,
materialist
Seems like
probably would think that once you die, that's it. There's no soul, so once you die, you're
exactly.
gone, right?
There's no immaterial soul in the
Okay.
materialist worldview.
that's right.
And I think that's what Data in that scene was asking: is there a soul? And Data's worried about the concept of a soul because he, as a robot, wouldn't necessarily have a soul. And if a soul is the essence of what a person is, then Data would not be a person. And that's kind of where that question comes from.
Well, I think, Tim, you and I both missed the episode where they discussed Measure of a Man and the philosophy behind that. Well, that's a shame. But nevertheless, we didn't miss it. There's another data point I think we ought to consider in this whole discussion. And it's not just Picard talking about the falling short of a mythology or the falling short of atheism, or materialism. I'll grant you the hair splitting that you do. The other data point is who watches the Watchers.
That's a very important. I mean, that's a key scene where he talks about religion. But can we continue talking about this sort of concept here? Because he does reference.
No, I made my point, and we're moving on.
Well, I just wanted to make it clear, though, he does in that speech talk about a sort of a teleological principle, but I don't think he's actually implying in that the teleological proof of God is that there actually is a God. In that statement, he's saying that there's order in the universe and that we don't completely understand that order yet. I think that's all he's saying, and that. Yeah. And again, like I mentioned before, that's a very Roddenberry-esque concept that the universe is this huge, wonderful place, and we're supposed to try to figure it out, but we don't know it all yet.
It's a Roddenberry-esque concept, but it's also an Aquinian concept, too. And I think, well, I don't think, I know, one of the things that I try to draw out in my book is that what Picard's getting at here is some sort of a common ground on which theists and atheists alike can converge. We can admire that the line there are more things in heaven and earth ratio than are dreamt of in your philosophies. We both can agree, okay, there's something far more wonderful than what we're talking about right now. And maybe that thing which is far more wonderful might be beyond our current mental constructs of what's deeper than reality. Maybe that clockwork perfection points to something that's beyond our understanding. And I think that's something everybody can agree on.
Yes, I suppose I agree then. And I think also in that scene too, Picard didn't necessarily want to say no, Data, you don't have a soul, or say for certain either way.
Yeah, so he adopts a principle of humility. I mean, that's the starting point of philosophy. It's the starting point of religion. It's the starting point of a great many things. Humility.
That's a much better way of saying what I was trying to say.
Well, everybody likes humility.
Indeed, but my point though was that although he does at one point sound like he's talking about this teleological proof by design, that I don't think there is that implication there in the writer's view of the episode or in Picard's character.
What's teleological mean?
Purpose. Well, I'll let Tim explain it. I mean, he just used the term.
Well, telos is a Greek word that means purpose or goal. So a way of defining something is defining it by telos. And a person's goal may be to live a good life. And but in philosophy of religion, something called the teleological proof, which is saying the fact that things seem to have goals, and their goal is God. So it defines God as the goal of things. And one of the most important aspects of the teleological proof is the proof by design, saying that the order and the goal of things is evidence of God's designing things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're to boil it down a little bit more, it's the concept that the universe is directed by something.
Yeah,
I mean,
you look
there
at how the chances are that human life would develop on this blue ball that's circling around the sun, and you say that can't possibly happen by chance. That has to have been directed by a supreme being.
Sure,
One
yeah,
may say that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some philosophers that'll interpret it that way, but on a broader scale and on a more ancient scale, I mean, absolutely, that's the way a lot of people go with it. But nowadays, but in ancient times, the way they used to go with it is saying it's the mathematical direction of the universe, or the fact that we can have a mathematical description of it implies that it has a direction. It implies that it's directed by something, and that something is scientific laws. But okay, because the universe has a direction, it implies something capable of directing. And what's that something? Let's try to unpack that statement. What's capable of arranging things rationally or reasonably? And there are implications there that Aquinas is going to argue beyond the scope of materialism, which is often synonymous with atheism, but Tim wants to do some hair splitting. It implies something beyond.
Well, I think that's an important point, but
well, I don't. I mean, if you're an atheist, but you grant me there's something beyond the universe or the multiverse.
Most atheists are materialists. But saying that there's order in the universe, saying that there's fundamental universal laws that are beyond our understanding, is certainly not in contradiction with an atheist view of God's existence, of a relationship with God.
The things I think of when I think of Picard being religious or not religious are a couple of references he makes here and there in various episodes. In the episode where he died, he goes to the afterlife and Q is waiting for him. And Q claims to be God. Picard says, I don't believe you're
not God.
Yeah, he doesn't say, I don't believe there is a God. He says, I don't believe you're God because the universe is not that badly designed.
Yeah.
So,
I am not dead because I refuse to believe the afterlife is run by you. The universe is not so badly designed.
That's the line. That's the line. It's
and that's a much more theistic line than the other one we were discussing, I believe.
When he when they had to deal with Ardra, the Karn artist impersonating the devil. He said, I don't believe you're the devil. He never said, I don't believe in devils. He didn't criticize the concept of, the devil exists or whatever. He just criticized the fact that this is not the devil, and he wanted to know who and what she
disagree
really
with
was.
you there. I think Picard in that episode assumes that the existence of a devil is stupid, and the existence or the idea that a culture would actually make legal and sort of like decisions on how to run itself politically based on these superstitions as fundamentally wrong and fundamentally against sort of his and the Federation's view of the way people should organize themselves.
Well, he comes across throughout the show as somebody who's opposed to fear and superstition.
Yes, and that might lead into the Who Watches the Watchers episode.
Yeah, exactly. He never ever mentions how, to my memory anyway, Minnetonkaans believe in God. He always talks about their superstitions and how, centuries ago humans abandoned their belief in superstitions or something, and you want me to, or no, he was talking about, let me read the quote here. Then you go, they abandoned their belief in the supernatural, and they asked me to sabotage that achievement.
Right. Well,
and I think there's a key shift here. I think perhaps he's not just talking about the supernatural, but I would suppose he's also talking about natural religion.
That might be a bit of an eisegesis, though. And there I go again with the philosophical vocabulary. I think you might be reading into that too much. Because...
Well, it's written by a writer who isn't...
Yeah, I mean, the writer is clearly an atheist. I'll grant you that. Whoever wrote the show was clearly an atheist. And...
Well, I think they had more than one writer, and I think that might be why there's some...
I don't think Roddenberry even... I don't think Roddenberry even was strictly an atheist. I've heard people say he was a pantheist or sort of a secular scientist type.
But yeah, sure. I just... My view on that, where he calls atheism an accomplishment, is that one, I'm not offended by his repudiation of paganism, which is to say somebody wanted to make a religion out of the Picard. Well, as a Christian, I'd be the first to stand up and say, no, you really shouldn't make a religion out of Jean-Luc Picard. As a good Christian, I would want to be even stronger than he was in repudiating that. But the second thing is, it was C.S. Lewis's point, because he does mention atheism as an accomplishment there. And Lewis's point was...
the rejection of spirituality and natural religion as the way that you view why things happen in the world.
Sure.
And I think that's separate from atheism, and just like materialism is separate from atheism.
Well, I'll grant you that. But the point I wanted to make was C.S. Lewis's point, which is, I'll read you the quote because it's in my book. I do a whole chapter on Picard and God. In Lewis's point, if you'll permit me the next 20 seconds of your lives, is, it is a profound mistake to imagine that Christianity ever intended to dissipate the bewilderment and even the terror, the sense of our own nothingness, which come upon us when we think about the nature of things. He's prophetically responding to Carl Sagan looking at the Earth, that photo of the Earth where it's just absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of the infinite.
The pale blue dot.
Yeah, exactly. Lewis goes on about our profound sense of nothingness when we look at the Earth as an infinitesimal, as a nothing in the grand scheme of the universe. Lewis says, it comes to intensify them. Without such sensations, there is no religion. Without such sensations of humility. Many a man, brought up in the glib profession of some shallow form of Christianity, who comes through reading astronomy to realize for the first time how majestically indifferent most reality is to man, and who perhaps abandons his religion on that account may at that moment be having his first genuinely religious experience. And what I interpret from that is that when you adopt an utter humility about the way the universe runs and our place in the universe, if you were brought up as somebody who's, culturally religious, but not genuinely religious, and you abandon that cultural religion because of your newfound humility, that's a genuinely religious experience. I mean, looking at that pale blue dot is a very religious experience, according to Lewis. And
I completely disagree with that. It's only a religious experience if you assume that it's God is part of the universe. If there's no God, there's no religious context. Then
sure.
it's just you and the universe.
Well, there's you in the infinite.
Yeah. Well, the infinity of the universe. But without God, without a sort of a religious structured view of God, it's not religious.
It enforces a humility on you. And what Picard is rejecting in Who Watches the Watchers is a very prideful, very arrogant concept of the Mintakans, the alien race in the episode, that they are adopting of themselves. I mean, that I should pray for God to give me a parking space, which some people do who are culturally religious, when there are starving children in the world. That he would be more interested in my parking space is its hubris, its pride, which is the antithesis of religion. And the pale blue dot introduces an aspect of humility into me, which is the beginning of religion.
I disagree with you there. Perhaps we have a different definition of religion.
Knock yourself out, Home Slice. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, I think I think religion means a relationship with God, and that's structured and shared with other people using some sort of doctrine or central dogma.
Sure. Why not?
The difference between like just a single crazy guy coming up with his own worldview or an occult is that there's a larger structure with other people shared. But the key there is the relationship with God. And
Sure.
if you look at different
Absolutely.
religions, the fundamental nature of a religion has everything to do with their relationship with God. Jews' relationship with God is through the covenant.
Absolutely.
Christians' relationship with God is through personal relationship with God and man, Jesus, as sort of a bridge to God.
Right.
The Muslims' relationship with God is putting God into their day-to-day life. And
Right. Through submission to him, yeah.
yeah, and I think this is the essence of what a religion is and what a religion means.
Right.
Well,
is
now,
relationship
Totally
with
agree.
God.
not to interject,
And
but
if you see sorry,
it's not just about the God, because there are some religions that worship something other than the God or God.
That's true too.
Paganism worships,
I-
God and goddess. The ancient Greeks, they had a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses.
Well, Tim only covered the
True.
monotheistic religions, but
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
let's interject that into the discussion too. Absolutely, that's right. Yeah.
true. But yeah, that's a very good point. But I was saying though about the pale blue dot is looking at the universe, and the universe is huge. There's 500 billion stars in our galaxy, and they think there's something like 500 billion galaxies. The
Right.
universe is incredibly big, and if you look at that, and you feel a sort of how very small, like there is a something happening there, but you can also feel a connection to it because you know that we are, as Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson have pointed out, we're all made of stars. We're all made of the universe in a way. That experience is not religious unless it's involving a relationship with God or a gods or whatever.
Well, here's where I disagree with you. It's that what you're saying is nothing new under the sun. because you go back to Ptolemy's astronomy. He will point out how the Earth is an infinitesimal, a mathematical nothing in the grand scheme of everything. You read Christian poets like Boethius. He'll sing, he'll write, he'll have these wonderful sensations about the Earth being an absolute nothing according to the rest of reality. So what you're saying, I mean, the pale blue dot isn't anything new to Christians. It's something that we've sung about for centuries. We've known about it for a very long time.
Even before Christianity, as you pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. Even before Christianity.
But,
and so why would this be a wonderful thing according to Christianity? It's because of what Christianity is. It's the same thing as philosophy. In philosophy, you go back to the beginning, Socrates. Who is the wise person, the philosophical person, the person who knows that he doesn't know anything? Now you import this into Christianity with Christ, his teaching is the exact same thing. Who's the pious person? Who's the religious person? You look at the parable of the thief, or not the thief, the tax collector and the Pharisee. The Pharisee prays in the temple and thanks God for his righteousness. The thief prays and says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. The thief is humble, and Christ says the tax collector is humble. And Christ says it's the tax collector who's actually the pious person. The person who is humble enough to know that he's not particularly pious is actually the religious person. And so all of religious philosophy subsequent to that has said the central virtue is humility and the central sin is pride. Just like in philosophy, the central sin is humility, knowing that you don't know, and the central sin is pride, thinking that you're actually wise. So when Christianity comes along and says, look, we're nothing,
I disagree with that.
By all means disagree.
I think the foundational sin of Christianity is not believing in God. I think that's explicitly taught by Jesus in the Gospels.
Atheism is atheism would obviously be a biggie, but I think he
I
always...
think it is. Any sin is forgivable as long as you believe in God.
Oh, you're talking about denouncing the Holy Spirit. Well, I've got some thoughts on that too, but that would be a theological conversation too. I mean, denouncing the Holy Spirit.
I think we're getting off. Sorry, on a tangent.
Yeah, I don't think that means atheism. I think it means.
But we were talking about the humble sort of.
I know in Picard
relationship we feel with the universe when we look at it, and I was saying that there's no reason to think that it could be religious if you're assuming that the universe is a theistic God and you have a religious kind of view on that. But I don't necessarily think it's religious, and I don't think it's, more importantly, it's a religious view in the Star Trek universe or in the way that Picard would look at it.
No, but there is this remarkable sense of awe that Carl Sagan gets, and this Roddenberryan philosophy.
It's almost like I call it an atheist mysticism.
Sure, and what C.S. Lewis was getting at there was the same thing Boethius was getting at, was the same thing Pascal was getting at, and it's the same thing I'm trying to get at right now, is that this sense of awe of the grandeur of the universe and its indifference to me is one of the starting points of religion. Now, you don't have to draw all of the implications out. I'm just saying this is a common ground. What Picard's getting at in Who Watches the Watchers and his repudiation of paganism is something we can all agree on. And his admiration of humility, this sense of awe when we look at the universe in Where Silence Has Lease, that's another common ground that we can all agree on. That's my point. Feel free to tear.
I think so, but I do disagree with that statement in the sense that if you do have a personal relationship with God, then you do have a personal relationship with the universe. And then it's not really the same thing you feel if there is no personal relationship with the universe. If you realize that you're just a collection of biological, a collection of organic matter that happen to connect at a certain point and emerge consciousness. There's no relationship there with the universe other than that we were once not ourselves. We were once just other random pieces of the universe, and eventually we will be that again. But if you have a personal relationship with God, I think that you do have perhaps a different relationship with the universe. I don't know.
I really don't recall the Sagan quote, and so what I'm about to say is merely inspired by Carl Sagan, an atheist, by the way. But I don't even remember enough of it to even look.
Which one are you talking about?
He says something to the effect of, when you're looking at the pale blue dot, that every relationship we've ever had, when you're looking at this nothing, every war that's ever been fought, every government that's ever come to power, every argument we've ever had, every economic system, every X, Y, and Z, everything that's ever been acquired, everything that's ever been desired, all of this takes place on this, this nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I will read that to my religious friends, and they're like, wow, that is really profound. There's genuine wisdom there.
It's one of my favorite quotes from his book.
Sure, and I honestly, I wish I remembered more of it, because I remember reading
that was basically it, I think.
Okay, well, when you think about that, when you boil it down, you get that same sense that I get when I'm looking at. I often go to. This will mean nothing to any of the listeners, but something to Tim and I. When we go to, there's a train bridge in our city, and I'll go admire the stars, being intoxicated by them, listening to the waves crashing against the rocks. And I'll think of, some of the English and the French who were fighting wars a couple hundred years previously to me, standing there in the same spot. Or maybe some of the First Nations people who were looking up at the stars, having some of the same thoughts I was. And I find that not only utterly intoxicating, but also a profoundly religious experience. And that's the sort of religious experience that Picard has.
I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't even think you're having a religious experience there. I think you're seeing the connection you have with how small you are and how small everyone else is, and how small we are, but we're seeing something so much larger than us. And what we're seeing is so much more important, so much more grand than anything. We can't even comprehend it.
Tim, I've never felt closer to God when I'm having one of those experiences.
I just don't necessarily see where a personal relationship with God comes into that. Then, I guess we're talking about personal feelings at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does this tie back into Picard?
Just to interject for a moment.
Sorry, we totally went off on a pretty absurd chat.
That's why we do this. It's a lot of fun that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We can clean it up in post. But we probably won't, because that's what makes these conversations interesting, are all the little side tracks.
I try to do very minimal cleaning.
Years ago, there was a article I read somewhere where somebody was discussing religion in Star Trek and said something along the lines of how Star Trek is universally religious and universally irreligious, because there's basically something in Star Trek for everybody, no matter what you believe. You can point to this as proof of, Star Trek supports religion. You can point to this as proof that Star Trek supports, secular rationalism and isn't religious. There's something for everybody in the Star Trek universe. So they really did manage to get a handle on this whole concept of universal peace and harmony that the Federation is built on, because there really is something in the Federation for everybody, no matter what you believe. The Federation can make you happy.
That's wonderful. I like that. I really do.
And it's a reflection of humans, I think, too, that all the different pieces, all the different races in Star Trek are really just different aspects of humans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Back to the Picard thing, I went scrolling through the old memory banks to try to find something. Early on in Season 1 was another encounter Jean-Luc Picard had with a godlike being. They didn't have as many gods in The Next Generation as they had in the original series, but they had a few.
That's right.
And this one The episode was called Justice. Wesley Crusher is sentenced to
yes.
death for stepping on flowers.
Right.
It's it's a brilliant but brutal legal system on this perfect little planet. There are certain things that are crimes, and if you commit a crime, any crime, you are put to death for doing so. There's no
It's sort of Kantian.
right.
Well,
And
possibly sentenced to death.
right. And Picard decides he's going to intervene, and they're making some passionate speeches. The episode is more about their views on the death penalty than it is their views on religion. But on behalf of these peaceful aliens, there is a little divine intervention as their god shows up. And Picard actually and this one they did walk that fine line, because Picard is thinking of them as aliens or something else. He doesn't say they are gods, but at the same time, he doesn't try to solve the problem through secular means. He doesn't try to figure out a way to short out half their spaceship so he can make his escape. He actually prays to God to convince these gods to let them go.
I completely disagree with that. I don't think he's viewing I think they were called the Edo.
Yeah, the Edo.
As
Yeah.
gods at all. He was viewing them as I suppose it is similar to the original series a little bit more, but as a sort of there's this in the original series particularly there's a lot of cultures where there's a sort of a childlike culture, then a dominant parent culture that orders their rules, and sometimes that dominant parent culture happens to be a robot for some reason.
The giant
but I think
snake robot. Yeah, I remember that one.
I think he's just trying to work within their own legal systems to respect their own and respect their own beliefs. I don't think that he is in any way suggesting that the Edo might be God or anything like that.
I don't even think that it was that. I don't know that he had the slightest bit of respect for the Edo god. I think he was simply powerless against it. And so he made a plea to the Edo god to which he was powerless against.
Yeah, but I mean, there are so many times when the Enterprise and crew have been outgunned, outclassed, out-technologied, and they find a way. He's perfectly willing to find the way to modify the phase variance, to reverse the polarity, to give him that 5-second edge to make their technology just good enough to get the job done. But in this case, he doesn't even try to run any. He's not even trying to probe the mysteries and see if there's a solution. It's not like his crew gave him a solution and said, we could try this. And he says, no, let's respect their culture. He didn't even look for one in this episode, which I thought was kind of... the whole religion part was a side issue when they were talking about the death penalty, but it was just something about Picard's tolerance that makes him stand out. Because
I think that was the prime directive.
Yeah,
that they had to respect the laws.
I don't think that he felt as if he had to respect the Edo god. He had to respect the people on the planet.
Yeah,
And the conclusion of the episode was the fact that he didn't respect them.
Yeah,
I don't think that he had any tolerance for them at all. He didn't respect their laws. They were unjust, and so he ignored their laws.
Well, I think in the Star Trek universe, particularly, and in the Next Generation universe, the humanity and the Federation is very idealized. They're very powerful, but they're not the most powerful thing in the universe. There's lots of a lot more powerful beings and cultures, but they're always limited. Eventually humans are going to be able to get there too. Even Q, is implied that he has some limits, and in particular in the first season, that humans will someday or evolve to be that powerful too.
Yeah, I remember that. That was one of those lines where Q says, "You really think that's how good humanity is?" And Picard says, "That's how good humanity is going to be."
Right. Yeah, and then again, I keep pointing this out, but that's a very Roddenberry-esque view.
Yeah. This next, it's kind of bad that Ben's not here tonight with us because he is a huge Deep Space Nine fan, but there's something about Picard's tolerance of religion that stands out a bit more, and the thing that sets it for me is when you compare his views of other cultures' religion to Captain Sisko's views of the Bajoran religion. I mean, Captain Sisko starts out, he's kind of a snobby little, he has no respect for this primitive, superstitious mumbo-jumbo stuff at all. He thinks it's all
I disagree
silly.
with that.
Well, we can
And,
save
well-
that argument for Deep Space Nine, Prophets, and Paul Ray's
Yeah,
episode.
we'll get back to it. But
Let's
I mean,
do
just to contrast it, I mean, that was one of the big things about that show is a lot of the Federation and Sisko. I mean, by the end of it, Sisko was accepting his role as the emissary, the prophet, whatever it was, emissary, and but
Well,
in the beginning, he just wanted to stick to it. I don't want to hear about your religion. I don't want to hear about your prophets. I just want to do my job. And it took 7 years of them working on him, and he actually had face-to-face encounters with these gods and knew they were real, and he still had issues up until the very end. Picard never really had any major confrontations. I'm not sure I count what Q did as a major confrontation with a god. Q is kind of a screwball by any measure of the means. But even when Picard, in any time Picard had a cultural encounter with someone else, even when he didn't agree with what they stood for, he was able to let them down gently, and he didn't have that little edge of not quite contempt. I mean, there was a little bit more respect and tolerance coming from Picard than you saw later on coming from Captain Sisko. I mean, Sisko was a nice guy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to paint him as a villain. I'm just saying. Picard
I don't actually agree with that. I think he was particularly respectful of Kaiopaka in the very first episode. He had a lot of respect and fascination for the Bajoran religion. He just initially rejected the idea that he was a figure in their religion, which I think a big part of Picard is tolerance. He's all about tolerance, but I think tolerance goes back to this sort of the Federation's view of other cultures, and that everyone should be free to believe and do what they want, which is a humanist view of personal rights. But to touch back on what you were saying about Sisko in that context, I think he did have a lot of respect for Bajorans. Just he didn't want to become part of their religion. I
don't agree.
Well, we really ought to save that one because we'll definitely talk about Sisko and the Bajorans in a future episode. There's no question about that.
To get
Good.
As long as we talk about Vedic Yarka when we get there, I'm happy.
Okay, well, you'll have to explain it to us when we get to it.
I just wanted to draw that little brief comparison to show that Picard really is a little bit more
tolerant. You're saying
tolerant than other captains. I mean, it's hard to really characterize any of the early stuff with Kirk because that was a continuity nightmare as far as character development. But
all right. I mean, so do we have any further thoughts on Picard's religious views? Anything kind of wrap this up?
Well, just that he's an atheist.
And that's that, huh?
I think what it is Picard is the ideal we all want to live up to. So we want him to be, Mr. Davidson sees atheism as the best philosophical outlook as far as religion goes. So Picard being the best example of humanity, Picard must be an atheist, while someone who has a religious view would see their religion as the best philosophical view. So Picard is, I think Picard is sort of Mr. Perfect. I don't want to go that far with it, but he is sort of the ideal human. So we aspire to be like him, but we also see some of ourselves in him already because he is us. He's not some stiff caricature. He's a real person because he still has his own flaws and his humility. So he's us and he's the us we want to be most.
Well,
I think
that-
that's
I
absolutely
see.
correct there. And
I
there's some
do.
truth there.
I don't see that at all. I see Picard as the embodiment of the writer's own cowardice. Whoever was writing the episode, I see something in Picard I find enormously admirable. But at the same time, he wasn't willing to except for in the case of Who Watches the Watchers, he really didn't want to out himself as an atheist. He would say something that I would find admirable as a Christian. And he would say something Tim would find admirable of whatever Tim is. And, we'd just leave it at that. I would find his humility admirable. I would find his,
But
respect
finding
for...
him admirable doesn't mean he agrees with you.
I know,
there's no outing as an atheist.
I-
You're an atheist if you don't believe God exists, if you don't have a relationship with God. And I think his character has never been shown to have a relationship with God, and it's been at least implied that he doesn't believe gods exist. There's no reason to believe he thinks a God exists.
Well, it depends on the episode.
Character is atheist as much as...
It depends on the episode now, doesn't it?
I don't think there's any episode where he talks about believing in God. I mean, granted, there was...
Not directly.
There was
Well-
we went over the key. We did go over, I think, the key quotes and scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he never says
He
there
didn't-
is no God. He just says you are not that God. But
Yeah, we didn't talk about we did talk about where silence has lease, but we didn't talk about. My goodness, I'm even forgetting the title of the episode where Picard says Q is not God.
Tapestry.
Tapestry, yeah.
Yes, tapestries.
Yeah, and that's probably the most theistic line he has on the
Where
show.
he says he has a certain concept of God, of which Q does not live up to. So he does have a concept of God. Whether or not...
Well, he has a concept of order in the universe. I think we still fundamentally disagree whether that has to be God.
Sure, but whether or not Q lives up to that thing which is capable of arranging the order, we both agree that Q is not capable of arranging that. But the fact that Picard has something in mind that is far more profound, far more enlightening than Q, I think speaks to something of theism.
Something else to chew over here too, is particularly in regards to that episode, Tapestry. That was a later episode, wasn't it? 5th, 6th season, something like that.
something like that.
I think it was 5th, but I'm...
Yeah, all these other episodes we've been discussing, where Silence has lease, Who Watches the Watchers, all those took place before this. Is it possible that maybe Picard kind of started changing as the series went on, especially if this particular episode, Tapestry, kind of made him think about it? And the reason I say that is because, okay, he gets shot, suddenly he finds himself in an all-white place, and he meets Q. Before he even sees Q, he thinks, "Oh my!" You can imagine what's running through his mind right now. Oh my God, I'm dead. I must be in heaven or something. And then suddenly Q appears, and that confuses him some. And he says, "No, I must not be in heaven after all. It's just Q playing one of his silly games with me." But one more thing is, at the end of the episode, after he's been returned to his normal life and he's alive again, you don't see Q. In almost every other Q episode, Q will pop back up and gloat or say some witty line. But in this one, he doesn't. So we're kind of left with the thought of, did all this happen in his mind? Was it manufactured because, in his mind, because he really did die on that table and then they brought him back to life? It leaves a whole lot of questions open there, and maybe, just maybe, his ideas of maybe there really is God kind of changed during that episode, especially when the moment he found himself in that before he saw Q in that other place.
I think, Chris, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you there. I don't think the episode leaves that open at all. I think it definitely implies that Q was messing with them.
Yeah, he could have, but knowing Q, I would have expected him to pop back up at the end and say something or do something.
Why do you think that the episode doesn't leave that open, Tim?
Well, I suppose I've probably seen that one relatively recently. But I don't particularly remember exactly the ending, but
we're Trekkers. We've all seen it relatively recently.
I remember it being a typical Q episode, and that there's... I remember there's an end perhaps when he's talking maybe with Riker about the experience.
Yeah, he's talking with someone. I can't remember if it was Riker or Troy.
Yeah, it was. He and Riker were sitting at the table, and Riker says, I can't imagine you as a Hellraiser. And Picard says, well, let me tell you about this other time I ran into the Nausicaans. And he starts going, and that was how they ended it, with Picard starting to share a little of his misspent youth with Riker.
But to go into the idea that he could have dreamt it, I don't think that's typically a plot device used in Star Trek. I can't think of any episode where it could have all been a dream.
There was
could have all been a holodeck, but
there was the murder episode where they did that. Not murder, the suicide. Troy has vision. Yeah. Somebody stepped into the warp nacelle and fried themselves after killing their lover. And it was a 30-year-old case, but Troy ends up living it in this odd vision.
Okay, good point. But still, I think this was just a regular Q. I don't think the episode, at least the writers, didn't mean to leave that open to interpretation.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Tim on this one. I think it was a Q episode. I mean, I didn't...
Oh, yeah.
When you mentioned it, yeah, it is something to think about. Why didn't Q show up to gloat? But, it is odd that Q didn't show up to gloat afterwards. But I think it was...
Well, even that whole episode was it was more of just Q helping Picard. I don't remember specifically, but I think at the start of the episode, there's a part where it implies that Picard... No, it starts right where... It starts with him dying, doesn't it? But
yeah.
Welcome to the afterlife.
Yeah, but I think there's a lesson that Picard learns in that episode about who he really is and the decisions he's made and to become the person he is in his lifetime that Q teaches him.
I agree with that. I mean, there's just simple metaphysical implications to the episode that Picard has he has a particular concept of God.
But going back to what Chris was saying, that if you were to be on an operating table and know that you could die, and then suddenly to wake up in a white place, even an atheist would say something along the lines of, what's going on here? Am I dead? Am I in heaven? And then if you see Q, you would probably, even an atheist, say something along the lines of, I don't think, Q, that you're God. That doesn't make sense to me.
I know, but that's because an atheist has a concept of God that is not compatible with Q.
True.
No, I think it is an interesting kind of point. If an atheist saw God, they'd believe in God. But if an atheist had to deal with this super powerful godlike imp who is just really annoying, the atheist would not. Q could be classified as a god. It's straight up.
He's not God, strictly speaking. Not in the philosophy of religion.
Right, he's a god. He's not the god. There's no big G with it. But I mean, he wills it into being, and it happens. I mean, that's a big step up from regular rational existence. I mean, like we were saying about the rules of the universe, Q doesn't need to follow the rules of the universe. He writes his own. He may not be the god. I don't know if there are planets out there that worship the Qs, but
I think
He
he's
is-
worshipped as the devil on some planets.
Yeah, I think there are a few that might have that.
Is it
Um,
the god of
he-
God of
tears?
lies.
The god of lies.
Loki. He's Loki. He's the trickster.
He's Loki.
Also, you notice
He's that,
that episode is the only Q episode that doesn't have Q in the title.
Which
That is-
episode?
Tapestry.
Tapestry. There's no
Tapestry.
Q in the title.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there's no coupon.
But
It's
Sorry,
a
I
good
just thought I'd
episode.
bring that up.
yeah,
It's not a
Q is
typical
interesting.
episode, I suppose.
Yeah, it's Q is interesting. He's, I mean, I don't know how you would classify him. He's, I mean, a god is as good a classification as any. He's not the god. I don't know if anybody, but yeah,
Well-
I think even if you can accept that Q is a god, little g, he's a demigod, whatever. I don't think it's enough to qualify as he should be worshipped.
Yeah, there's a distinction that Augustine made, and I was really happy to see it when I read it in City of Gods, because up until I had read that, I thought I was the only one who made the distinction. And it's when you read ancient paganism, whether it's Norse mythology with Loki or ancient Greek mythology with whoever,
Mhm.
they often talk about celestial beings as gods. And Augustine says, well, they're actually just angels or demons or what have you, by our criteria. And by our, he means Christianity. He says, by our criteria, they're just angels or demons. They're lesser beings than God. So Q could be someone, you know, in that umbrage. Q could
Very
be
interesting
somebody. Yeah.
Well, there's a character in the original series where they actually meet Apollo, and he's pretty similar to Q.
Yeah, sure. He
Mhm,
has in Traylene as well. I mean, and a
Sure,
whole host
yep.
of others.
Yeah, they had a lot of run-ins with gods. For a while, it seems like when you watch the original series, it's either in this episode we meet a god, or in this episode a crewman gets zapped and has the powers of God.
Yeah,
Or
like
it was Charlie X.
stereotypical.
It was the rescued
Charlie
orphan
X.
who had the powers of a god.
absolutely. No, I mean, my point is, sure, Q could be considered, you know, something inhuman, but still absolutely wonderful. But at the same time, that doesn't mean he's worthy of worship. That distinction exists in religious philosophy prior to Star Trek. That's all I'm saying.
He's not a theistic god, but he's not necessarily worth. You made your point about worthy of worship, but in many pagan religions, there are god figures that are worshipped that aren't necessarily nice gods or that powerful gods. They're just happen to be the god of the city or.
Well, we
the
can
god that
actually probably take that discussion to the Q episode, because we will be discussing John Delancey and Q in the future, and we'll definitely bring up some more God discussions during that episode. No question about that.
Okay, point taken then. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we got
can-
that in the
yeah.
list here for future episodes.
We've
So,
got the-
anything we want to kind of say to wrap this one up?
No, Picard looks good naked. That's all I want to say.
Oh,
Well,
no. Can't
I
go
think-
there. I still remember that interrogation episode. Picard without his shirt, he looked like he was 95.
Really, I've always been really impressed by his physique. I was just going to say Patrick Stewart's a brilliant actor, and I think even the reason that we can have this sort of discussion about his own metaphysical views and his own cultural identity is because Patrick Stewart's such a good actor.
Does anyone know
Oh,
what
yeah,
Patrick
absolutely.
Stewart's religion is, or if he has one?
I will wiki it
he-
and find out.
Well, no, he was.
I know he's a socialist.
He was pressed. William Shatner actually did a wonderful documentary on the captains, where he interviewed all of the captains on their own personal private views of X, Y, and Z, and religion was a prominent topic because Scotty had just died, the actor who played him. Yeah, it was a really interesting documentary, and Picard was extremely nebulous and evasive I found when Shatner asked him the question.
Patrick
So,
Stewart?
yeah, Patrick Stewart, I meant to say. Yeah, so I mean, Jonathan Archer, Scott Bakula, he was very upfront about what it was that he believed. Janeway, I recall, was upfront, but Patrick Stewart was unclear. I mean, Cisco Avery Brooks, I mean, he was unclear, but you can
He's
ask
always
him,
unclear.
Yeah, you ask him what the
A
rest
little
of
trivia.
Cornbread is, and he's unclear. He'll sing a jazz song to you, and you don't know what he's saying back to you. But Patrick Stewart was unclear too. I mean, he was so eloquent on every question except for that.
I have to go back and watch that again. It's been a while.
Yeah, me too. I don't know. I thought that's worthy of consideration because the question was brought up. What does the actor believe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Well, clearly
That's not
there's
the same
more.
Patrick Stewart. Never mind.
Sorry.
Oh,
you're looking it up.
I looked it up and I got one here. Patrick Stewart is a Wiccan.
I doubt that.
Wiccan?
But
I could be
it's
wrong.
not, yeah, it's not actually that Patrick Stewart. It's hold on, and I will send you the link. It's Sergeant Patrick D. Stewart, a soldier in the U.S. Army, died in combat in Afghanistan when his Chinook helicopter was shot down by an RPG. He was
there
a
you have
practicing Wiccan.
There you have it.
So it was a different Patrick Stewart, but I mean, you type in Patrick Stewart's religion, and
All
here's this.
Patrick Stewarts are the same.
Yeah. It's a big family.
Are Wiccans atheists?
Uh,
I'm not sure if Wiccan. I don't know.
Wicca, I'll go ahead and say this right now. Wicca, I actually pursued that as a religion many years ago when I was younger, and basically it's witchcraft is what it is. But it's not quite what you think. If your exposure to witchcraft is what you see in movies, television, and popular media. It's worth a read. A book like Witchcraft Today or something. It's worth a read. But Wicca is basically the real term for it. It's actually a very loving sort of religion that has two gods, a god and a goddess. I didn't stick with it for too long. And I eventually came back to Christianity in 2007. But it's something worth looking at if you're curious, if you're into theology at all.
Yeah, it's sort of a neo-paganism. Sometime back in the early 20th century, I don't remember if the dude was a scholar of antiquities or just a religious free thinker, but this guy tried to launch a rebirth, a reimagining of the ancient pagan religions based loosely on druid practices. But since druids are a relatively closed-mouthed bunch that pass their knowledge down father to son and don't share any information with outsiders, it was based on it, but it's not a direct continuation of it. It's a relatively new religion based on very, very old views. And like Chris was saying, it's a decent. It's big on the love and peace and harmony and all that hippie type stuff. It's a nice religion. It's not some flaky fruitcake fringe. Although for a while in the 90s, every kid rebelling against their parents was doing that.
Myself
no
included.
Offense, Chris, I don't know if that was why you meant that way, but
well, I wasn't rebelling, but yeah, it was in the 90s.
You experimented it when you were in college.
There you go.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of the high school kids who are doing it are pretty much just doing it to irritate their parents. But I mean, it's generally a decent religion. It's fairly new, but it's based on some fairly old ideas.
Right, a sort of a neo-modern interpretation of old ideas.
Right. It's not paganism. It's not direct druid practices. It's no druid. It's no pagan. It's meant to look really, really old, but it's really, really not.
Right.
I guess
Interesting.
the evil opposite of it would be the people who think the Necronomicon is real. H.P.
Lovecraft.
Lovecraft's invented evil religion of the ancient eldritch gods, the book of burial rites to open portals to summon these gods who are just so different from us that they're pure evil from our point of view, but they're not malicious. They're just bizarre. One look at them drives you crazy. But there are people who really believe that such a book actually exists and that the H.P. Lovecraft stuff is based on a true story.
Oh, that sounds like a lovely religion. I want in.
Yeah. Those,
I don't think that's
Sign
necessarily
me
a
up.
religion.
Well, I mean, there are gods and there are there are priests. It's got all the trappings. It's not a religion anybody should really want to practice since it brings about the end of the world.
Oh, doesn't Christianity and Islam?
They bring about the end of
They're
all the
basically
world except for them.
eschatological.
Yeah, it's all the world except for them gets destroyed in Christianity and Islam. Everybody else dies, but we win in the end. With the old Lovecraft stuff, we're all pretty much dog chow.
Okay, well, we've on that note, talking about the end of the world, I guess we can bring this to a close. Bill, you got
eschatology.
you want to take us out, Bill?
I've never really done a closing type thing, but okay, yeah, I'll do the close. Oh yeah,
okay.
that's right. Ben usually does that.
Oh yeah, he does.
Thank you for listening to Trekosophy. You can find this and other podcasts at our official website at www.trekosophy.com. Also, check out our Facebook page, like us, and listen to us. Yes, you can also find us on iTunes.
You bet your ass that's where you'll find us. But Tim
got
and
it
I
covered.
like bull like Star Trek, so that's
Thanks
We
for
will see you next
bringing
week.
along Mr. Davidson.
Mr. David. Well, you can call him Sir Davidson. He's not that big on formalities.
Okay, Lieutenant Davidson, maybe.
Lieutenant. Well, you're pushing it. How about Kai Davidson?
Oh no.
Better
From now
David.
on, I have to call him Tim, just so I can say, "Damn it, Tim! I'm a blogger, not a podcaster."
No, I think
I
I'm
like it.
pretty.
He's
All right.
dead, Tim. Damn it, Tim! I'm a doctor, not a miracle worker.
From now on, we'll just call him Damn It Tim. That'll be his full name. Damn It Tim. For somebody who likes Star Trek, it's pure luck if I even manage to log into my own laptop.
Well, see, that's why we like Star Trek. Star Trek, you don't do anything. You say, "Computer, reroute power to section 42B," and the computer does it for you. You don't have to know how to do it.
Love Star Trek. Love Star Trek. I hope this gets edited out of the podcast.
Oh yeah, I can edit this out, it's no problem.
We'll save it for the blooper reels. So somebody make a joke, so we've got something for the blooper reel.
What's the difference between beer nuts and deer nuts? Beer nuts are $1.49 a pound. Deer nuts are just under $1. There's your joke.
Okay, that's going to
There once was a
Nope.
woman from Venus whose body was shaped like a... Anyway,
Yeah.
moving on. I'm like the non-iPod person here, aren't I?
We're not recording anymore, are we?
Maybe.
We've got Chris the Savior preventing us from going down that route, but why don't we go down it next week?
Because someday we'll be famous. And when we're famous, we're going to be selling this as a CD set. And if you pre-order this CD set and pay an extra $5, we'll include 30 minutes of never-before-heard footage. Behind-the-scenes commentary, blooper reels, director's cut. Someday we'll have that instantaneous subspace network. And then a year from
Subspace?
now, Starfleet subspace. I'm making another Star Trek reference. They can talk halfway across the galaxy instantaneously with full HD video and audio. So it's only a matter of time before we can do the same thing.
Oh, somebody messaged me.
That was me posting this, the link to the document in our chat.
Oh man, I thought it was Jesus for sure this time.
Sorry, I'd like to aspire to be like him, but not quite there yet.
Everybody knows Jesus uses Ventrilo, not Skype.
Ah, Kirby's gotta get on Ventrilo. Kirby gotta meet Jesus.
I think a few times me and Brandon kind of overtook, like went too far.